doubt you have heard scale practice is essential to your development as a musician. But why? Well, this video is going to give you 6 reasons why and 6 ways that you can improve your scale practice. As you probably already know, if you just do something by rote over and over again, it doesn't necessarily mean you've learned anything. I mean, if you were learning a language and you acquired a bunch of words, but you didn't know what any of those words meant, what good would it be? Meaningful practice informs you and provides for you a way to really make real improvement and become a better musician and more creative in your process. So what is the difference between rote repetition learning and mindful learning? Well, repetition learning is just simply doing the same thing over and over again and kind of zoning out on what you're actually doing. But mindful learning is when you are engaged, when you're watching, you're observing, and you're thinking, and you're creatively involved in what you're doing. That will make it not only more meaningful, but also much more enjoyable. So what are these 6 steps? So one of the goals in practicing scales is skill development. And skill development really requires that you are an active observer. I mean, if you were trying to become the next Michael Jordan and you were shooting baskets, but you never observed whether the basketball went into the basket itself, there'd be little chance that you'd improve. And the same is true when you're learning to play an instrument. Your observation of how effective and how well your fingers are operating on the fretboard is one of the things that you can do when you're practicing scales. You don't have to think about rhythm necessarily at that moment. You don't have to think about speed. You're thinking about how well and how successful you are at producing consistent results, and that is a skill development. If your fingers are engaged on the fretboard and one finger is down and the other fingers have moved far from the fretboard, obviously it's going to take you longer to get from one thing to the next, and you're going to find that you're going to have difficulty sometimes in making the notes sound connected and get there quickly. So for the left hand, observation would be, can you keep the fingers closer to the fretboard? Can you keep them in a good position? Where's the thumb placement? And whether you're consistently getting good results. Another factor in that observation is if you were practicing scales and you were doing them in multiple positions, you would know that you'd have to stretch your fingers further apart or closer together when you're making position shifts. This is an example of why scale practice, when you are shifting in different positions or playing at different spots on the fretboard, becomes a significant part of you being able to quickly adjust to those changes. For guitar, that can be pretty extensive change from first position to a higher position, where the fingers are further stretched apart and the fingers are close together. So this is a physical observation that you're making, and one in which you do want to look at your hands. If you successfully master this part, you will not have to look at your hands. Your fingers will find their place and you'll be able to look at the music or just simply feel the music without having to try to direct the fingers. There are other factors that are a part of that observation, and that may involve more the right hand, that might have to do with tone and musicality. Are you making the notes as they go up and down the scale at different dynamic levels, like you would if you were singing the melody? If you just play notes that are and they're all the same dynamic, there's no real expressive value. But if that scale so that would be an example of how the dynamics could change and shift depending on what you're trying to say in the music. Tone is another factor that you can actually practice when you're doing scales. Maybe you want to play a song that's a blues song and you want it to sound on a nylon string instrument very bright, almost as if you're playing a steel string. Then you'd probably move your hand back, but you'd also be striking the string with a different angle so that when you're playing, which was quite a bit different tone than what I would do if I was playing a piece that might be a bit more romantic. You get the idea. Third reason for scale practice is to become more familiar with your instrument. In other words, to know your instrument means that you know the difference between, say, the note C and the note D. Now, why is this the case? Musical language has various different keys and patterns. You would know the difference between playing baseball and football, or soccer and basketball. There'd be some similarities, but they'd be different in many important ways. When we play in different keys, similarly, we're making music, but the language itself is telling you that there are different characteristics and things that have to do with music, has scales, and keys and chords, and knowing a little bit about that begins and includes scale practice. So if I know, for instance, that there's patterns to do scale in, say, second position, like C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, that pattern of fingering had intervals in it that went straight up the scale. When two parts, we had a movement of just one fret, and the rest were essentially movements of two frets, whole step and half steps. But that same pattern of fingering I did can also be found in seventh position. Same fingering, same pitches. Scale practice can help you become aware of where these patterns are located on the fretboard. And with that, that can also help you be able to learn different keys. That same pattern, if I move it to a different location, becomes a whole new set of notes. For instance, if I move it up 2 frets, I'm no longer playing a C scale, I'm playing a D major scale, and that has 2 sharps, F sharp and C sharp. And so musical elements in that practice, again, could be found in another position, in 9th position. Same scale, same notes. So you can use scale practice to learn your whole fretboard, and to learn that you can find sometimes the same notes in different places. And why is that important? Sometimes it could be just simply the fact that those 2 scales I just played, which were 2 C scales and 2 D major scales, did not sound the same. Yes, they had the same pitch, but the tonal quality was different. And maybe when I'm trying to express something and I want a particular tone, I want to be able to find that. Just like when you're in a conversation and you want to console someone or cheer someone up, you not only think about what words you're going to say, but how you're going to say it. Music is not just hitting the right notes, it's finding the right tone. What you are trying to express. Is the sound, the quality that you're using, is it something that's appealing, convincing, stylistic, in terms of the way that you want to communicate your ideas? And part of that is coming from you, your feelings about the music. And sometimes part of it is who you're playing for. I mean, if you were only playing for yourself, that would be all that you'd have to think about. But if you're trying to express something to someone else, your audience, then knowing a little bit about their expectation and then being able to communicate to them in a manner which would appeal to them and will be effective. Okay, so observation in terms of your scale practice becomes the observation of patterns and where those patterns lie on the fretboard of the guitar, so that you're better informed of all the notes on the instrument, but also how you can arrive at different tone qualities by just simply moving to different positions. We would like to be able, when we're practicing scales, to also address one of the hardest things that we as musicians have to deal with, and that is rhythm. Okay, I know that you were thinking this is all about putting your fingers on the guitar, but assuming that we have now gained mastery of our left-hand technique and right-hand technique, now we're also needing to think about rhythm. And when we're practicing rhythms, we're practicing our ability to be accurate in the counting of rhythms. So we can use our scale practice to practice different rhythms, especially rhythms that are maybe syncopated or more difficult for us to do. And to do that also helps activate another creative element. See, scale practice can also help you develop the ability to improvise, to create new melodies of your own. In order to do that, a melody is generated by two things. One, a sequence of notes that is tuneful, that's appealing, but even more important, or at least equally important, is the rhythm. Say, for instance, I play that's kind of an interesting idea, but pretty boring. But if I change that rhythm, well, that's much more interesting. So how do you navigate and learn how to play in different rhythms? One, you can be listening, but practicing doing that while you're doing scales, you will discover tunes that you say, oh, I like that. And if you are able to, you can write some of those ideas down so the next day you practice, you might even still remember what those ideas were. If you're practicing that and you're finding that some notes came out very nice and some did not come out so good, that means that you maybe didn't know your scale that well, because it's not that easy just to simply go from playing a pattern and making it rhythmically and melodically interesting. So I had all those same notes, but I was responding to what I was hearing and creating rhythms that I'd already practiced. I could practice just dotted rhythms when I'm going through a scale, and I can practice a series of notes. I can practice a leap, because one of the things I did just now is I didn't play the notes in order. I started with a little bit of a leap from the note D to G and then to F sharp to G. So scale practice doesn't mean that you always have to start in this note and then go to this note. It means that in your scale practice, you have now memorized the fingering, you've memorized what the names of those notes are, and maybe you also know something about the relationship of some of these notes to each other, which one's a leading tone, which one is more important, and so that will influence your way of playing some notes louder or softer. Okay, so number 5, it is this creative element in creating a tune, but incorporating rhythm. Rhythm as being a part of your practice and part of your scale practice. Number 6 is not focused on how fast your fingers can move exactly. It is not that capacity. Speed on guitar, spontaneously being able to create something very quickly, both of these things have to do with how you think as opposed to how your fingers move. If you move your fingers, and you can move them very quickly, but what comes out as chaos, is not going to necessarily be a very effective approach to practice or for playing for other people. So number 6 is being able to develop a habit of practice that allows you to think in chunks of pieces of information as opposed to each individual note. So there is a fluency that comes from the repetition, but also an understanding of how it fits in. So for instance, if I know that I'm playing in the key of C, I've already got an advantage that this massive fretboard over here has got specific notes that are going to fit in that key. So number 1, I know that scale that I'm going to be likely using. Number 2, I've practiced it with different patterns. So now those patterns become something that I can spontaneously and quickly place in the piece. And if I practice those patterns to such a degree that I can be able to use them in time in the actual piece of music, then I can apply that. So say, for instance, I have practiced a C scale, and I've practiced in a little pattern like that goes up 3 and back 1. Or maybe I did thirds. And then I'm trying to create an idea, a musical melody, spontaneously. And I think, I got a rhythm. It's going to go like... Okay, what I just did was a C scale, but I was utilizing all the things I would do in practicing my scales practice. In my scale practice, I don't restrict myself with just doing something by rote. I think about what the scale is, what the notes I'm playing, and imagine a rhythm or set of rhythms that I can be able to employ. What came before this was practice in thirds and in patterns that I could insert, just like a word. I'm looking for the right word to express something. I'm looking for the right rhythm to capture a kind of feeling of joy. Or maybe I'm looking at a rhythm that gives me a time to think more reflectively. You can hear I'm just playing that scale, but I'm using the scale to express something I'm feeling that is different. And when you practice your scales, if you incorporate that element of creativity, what you know, and now you're trying to express something, that begins with being able to think quickly. And that ability is connected to whether when you practice your scales, you've actually created patterns that you may be able to incorporate that best express what you're trying to express. And some of that is intuitive, and some of that is, much of that is spontaneous, as I just did, but all of it is built on what you did before to practice. Just like when you were a child, your vocabulary was small, you couldn't express certain things and feelings. But as you grew older and your vocabulary expanded, you were better able to express not only ideas and communicate, but also feelings, things that you reflect on or you celebrate. Okay, I hope this was inspiring in some level, that you realize that scale practice is something that you can use to develop your skills as a musician, and what's more, that depending on how you use your scales, you can be able to use it to help be more creative, compose, improvise, and that will also influence your ability to appreciate wonderful pieces of music and wonderful improvisational pieces as well. Okay, I hope this was helpful. I invite you and encourage you to subscribe if you would like to view more of the materials I put on YouTube, and happy practice.